Welcome to a new season of cross-checking, where this season we take a look at the Bible's guide to dealing with bad theology, aka the Book of Job. So,
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this episode of Cross-Checking. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I certainly can. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Laborious. That over there is my co-host, Ben Olschlager. This is the beginning of Season 10. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the party. We are your, honestly, if we're being honest, probably your only vaguely hockey-themed theology podcast. If this is the first season you're listening in, welcome, of course. A little bit of background on us. Ben and I are both pastors in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I'm a pastor down in Southeast Texas, a little bit southeast of Houston at Hope in Friendswood. And Ben is up there in Lake Orion, Michigan at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. And welcome to the party. You picked a good season to jump in on. It's definitely the most fun book of the Bible, and no one ever has any struggles with reading it or confusion about why it exists.
which is why it's easily one of the most requested Bible study topics ever. And in
Job and
part
Revelation.
because, yeah, exactly. In part because, like, if we're being honest, there's just not a lot of there's not a lot of meat on the bone when it comes to the Book of Job. There's a lot of bad you got to parse through to find the nuggets of wisdom. So we're gonna kind of speed run our way through Job, looking at a lot of the bad theology that. Okay, so let me give a little breakdown of the Book of Job here. So first couple of chapters of Job are Satan coming to God, asking eventually for God's permission to go mess with Job, doing so, and then Job starting to become distraught and question a whole bunch of things about God. The next 35-ish chapters, chapter 3 through I think chapter 37, are Job and his friends having this conversation about why in the world God would do this or let this happen, or all of these things in between. And in there we see so many almost picture perfect examples of the same kinds of things that we do in our day and age today, of bad theology, people applying bad theology in situations they don't understand because they're just trying to wrap their minds around something. And so our goal this season is to highlight some of those things, help walk you through why the theology we see is bad, give you some counterpoints, some things to think about instead, and just give us better answers to some of these deep questions about human nature and suffering and sin and all those kinds of things. And I mentioned there were two reasons that we're doing this way. One is because there's not a lot of meat on the bone, we want to cover a lot of ground in each episode. And the second is that Josh and I like to get sidetracked enough that we don't necessarily trust ourselves to do this with other people. So by doing this with just the two of us, we can kind of keep each other a little bit more accountable and on topic. And then it won't take a year and a half.
Because that's how the first 9 seasons of the show have gone.
At least that's the idea. That's the idea.
There aren't entire episodes of us going off on a sidetrack during a season, or every season has those, except for the first couple seasons where we just did requests, so every episode was a side quest.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying we're not going to get onto side quests through these, because like we'll probably answer the main question within the first like 5-10 minutes of most episodes of these podcasts, and then at that point we're probably we will. I promise you. I think
we won't get to it until the last 30 seconds.
Oh yeah, we go. Oh yeah, oops, we haven't done it yet. Anyway, I promise that this will be at least informative throughout, even if we don't stay fully on topic for the whole thing. And also, I don't think the Predators are going to be very good. There's our 30 seconds of hockey talk for this week. I don't feel like you disagree.
I genuinely don't know what to think, because the new general manager and president of hockey operations he's moved a lot of pieces, and a lot of them it's like, I don't know if that was a good decision or not. We shall see.
For reference, Josh is a fan of the Nashville Predators of the National Hockey League. I'm a fan of the Minnesota Wild. We both like making fun of the St. Louis Blues.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely my least favorite team in the league.
And I don't know if there's anything else that's really relevant.
No.
Yeah.
Well, in hockey, they call the penalty box the sin bin, which, has theological connotations.
Yeah, and cross-checking.
Word crosses. There are no snacks in the sin bin.
Oh, my camera's flipping out. I'm going to turn that off, turn that back on again. So, one other thing about this podcast, if you're new to us, these things are like planned with a direction, but beyond that, they're barely planned. So a lot of this is just kind of from the heart. We want you guys to be able to be curious about the faith and to grow in lots of different ways. And so if there's something related to what we're talking about that you find interesting and you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out, because we would love to answer what is on your heart, what's on your minds. There's 2 ways to do that. You can reach out to us through our Facebook page, which is for the show. You just search Cross Checking on Facebook, or just reach out to one of us personally. If you know either Josh or I, you can text us, email us, track us down after church, and just let us know.
And there's one of the sayings that I like to lean on is, I would rather answer the questions you have than the questions I imagine that you have. So yeah. And just to, not that I think we have a ton of brand new listeners, but if you are a new listener, the kind of the feeling we're going for on this podcast is, if you were to sit down at a bar with Ben and I and just hang out and get 2 pastors kind of casually geeking out a little bit, and obviously we're both in our offices, like we're not drinking here, but like that's kind of the relaxed water. Just dilly ice water's my favorite. So with all of that kind of introduction out of the way, we do not introduce ourselves every episode, but it is the start of a new season number 10, which is something.
I'm amazed we've made it this far. We're 5 years in ministry. People are still listening.
In fact, our listenership is growing. Is the crazy part.
Thank you. We don't have a nickname for you yet, but we should work on that.
We should come up with one.
If you have an idea, I'll share this on the. There's an idea. If you have an idea for the listenership of this podcast, demonym, I think that's a thing. Anyway, if you have an idea for what we should call the listeners of this podcast, put it in the comments on this episode, wherever you're listening to this. Throw it on the Facebook page, whatever you want to do. But we're interested. And there's a lot more people out there with more creativity than we have. Actually, that's not true. We're pretty wild.
Speaking of our growth, we are up to, and this is just on Spotify. They might pull some statistics in from like Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio, but I don't actually know how much they do that. But on Spotify, we have 8,034 all-time plays and downloads, with an average of between 30 and 40 listens per episode. So add sprinkle on a couple there for YouTube views. But we're growing. I mean, you go back 4 years, we had 10 people who listen to the podcast regularly. So it's been cool for us to see it grow. With all that being said, let's get into Job. And I figure a good place for us to start, if you don't mind, Ben, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit these first 2 chapters that we're going to be looking at.
Great.
I would encourage you, if you're listening to this or if you're watching this, go ahead and pause it. Take the 5-10 minutes to read Job 1 and 2, and just kind of, it's 22 verses and then 13 verses, so it shouldn't take you too long. But the summary, it kind of starts off by describing Job and who he is, and the phrase that gets used is he was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. So it's kind of setting up who Job is. And then, like Ben kind of referenced a little bit earlier in the episode, Satan goes before God. And that's kind of a side weird thing, but they have this conversation where God is holding up Job as an example. And Satan's like, well, yeah, of course he's faithful to you. You've made his life easy. You've given him all these gifts. You've blessed him. And God gives Satan permission to test Job, to mess with his property, he kills his children. He ruins a lot of his earthly wealth. And, Job still, it says in verse 20, Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, and this is a line that gets quoted probably from a different version, but he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. And you'd think, oh, okay, 1 chapter book of the Bible, check, good. But Satan's not satisfied. He goes back and he says, well, that's because you didn't let me touch him. You let me ruin all these things around him, but you didn't let me touch his health. And God's like, okay, you just can't kill him. And he does. And that's the setup in chapter 1 and 2. And at the end of chapter 2, you then have Job's 3 friends, of which the next 35 chapters of Job, 33.
Before we get
go
to the
through
3
their
friends,
response.
We get Job's wife turning on God, and it ain't pretty, folks. In verse 9, she literally says, curse God and die. This ain't worth it. This ain't worth it.
How kind and supportive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Then we get the 3 friends. And they are the 3 college friends that you had that they thought knew everything about life and the universe and the state of our existence. And they are just so full of beans. Just to quote a good friend of mine named Josh Laborious, they are smooth-brained.
They are smooth-brained. No ridges, no lumps, no valleys, no bumps.
Yep.
So anyway, with this background, this introduction to the book of Job, what we kind of want to tackle today is just the general idea of testing faith and talk about what is the distinction between testing and temptation, and then just the suffering that is part of the brokenness of the world. We want to talk a little bit about what testing specifically can look like for us today, and a little, just like a little teeny bit of how we can respond to it, because we're going to go into that in more depth later in the season for sure. So Ben, let's get started. How do you parse out testing versus temptation versus just the world is broken and we have to live in it?
So I think it's probably worth noting off the bat here. It's for us. This is probably, or for from a practical perspective, this is probably all just an us perspective thing, right? From God's perspective, everything that's happening in this world is something that He is either actively involved in or allowing to happen, right? He's got a purpose for everything. We don't get to know that purpose, but how
Well,
we approach.
I just want to pause there to undercut some people who might be like raising an eyebrow at that statement, like God either allows or has active part in everything. Like, think of the reverse. Is it possible for someone to do something that is outside of God's awareness? Is it, if God doesn't want something to happen, is it possible for that thing to happen? And the answer to these questions is no. So by necessity, like, this is a truth because God is all powerful and omnipotent, right? So just kind of a
Mhm.
carry on, Ben.
So, with that being said, why that comes to us, there are three reasons. And like Josh said, it could be temptation, it could be testing, it could be just we are experiencing the reality of a sinful and broken creation. I think a big part of how we end up interpreting the thing that is happening to us, we'll take Job's example here, right? Losing your livestock, losing your family, having your wife turn on God, and then having to deal with these three just dumb as rocks friends, right? Um, all of that could be a temptation. If there is no ability for Job to grow out of that, that's not ultimately what happens in the book of Job. But if there was no ability for Job to grow out of that, it might just be a temptation. If Job is in a place where he has good counsel and can grow from the failures, the brokenness, the sin that he has to endure and go through, there's an opportunity for testing. If this just kind of happens to him and there's not really a good explanation for it, that's where it's just us enduring the curse of sin. And all of that comes down to, how is Job positioned to deal with this? Right? And like, so say for example, Josh, if your family, I love your dogs. I'm going to use them as an example here in kind of a not so fun way. If you lost Ghost, right? He could be lost or he could be dead. You're up to your imagination. The different people in your family would perceive this in a different way, right? You, I trust you to be relatively wise, would probably see this as an opportunity for testing and growth, right? Why does God take away my favorite dog? This thing was terrible. I don't know if he's actually your favorite dog. I'll let you pick. Um, I don't, Chris might view it purely as temptation to just get mad at whatever took or caused Ghost to whatever, right? And for Zeke, who's like still developing a prefrontal cortex in some pretty significant ways, this is just, you gotta deal with the bad, right? You gotta learn how to function in the midst of brokenness in the world. And that's three people experiencing the same event in three very different ways because of how they are prepared in life and in faith to experience that thing. So I don't know. That's where I'm starting at. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think it can be helpful to nail down maybe not definitive definitions, but how I would define these three things.
Maybe give them
So
categories.
yeah, because testing for educational philosophy reasons, a lot of people's view on testing, I think, is not where it could be or should be in an ideal case scenario. Because what is a test for? In a perfect scenario, a test accomplishes two things. One, it gives you an accurate gauge of where you stand so that growth can continue, and so that any issues in growth can be dealt with. And the other thing a well-written test should be is, in and of itself, it should be a learning experience. Like, if the test is well written, if it is well done, you should walk out from the test better off than you walked in.
It can challenge your problem solving. It can challenge your ability to recall all these things.
Well, and it can even reinforce neurons. I mean, just take the example of flashcards. That a lot of people, if you're learning a language or you're learning something that's terminology heavy, and you have the flashcard and you look at it and you do a little test of yourself, like, do I know? And then you check yourself. And if you're right, it helps cement it. And if you're wrong, it can still help cement it, because you're like, oh, I missed by this much, or like it can be a reinforcing thing. So when it comes to, we'll say, divine testing, and we come across things in our lives, is there that learning component? Is it, especially from, and maybe especially from our perspective, is it giving us insight into where we stand and highlighting places where we can continue to grow, or where we need to go back and grow? Temptation, it is, as far as I'm concerned, is defined very differently, because temptation is we'll say, an enticing opportunity to go against the will of God. And in its most extreme version, enticement to abandon the faith and abandon trust in the promises of God entirely. Okay, so these tests, like Ben was saying, in different circumstances can just be temptation. Because there can be an opportunity, right? If you're being tested, like, there's an opportunity to do something you shouldn't in front of you. That can be a test. That can be an opportunity for growth. And that can be a place where you see, like, oh, this is a weakness for me. This is something I need to work on. But if there is never that element of reflection, or there's no one in your life that's going to invite that and say, like, hey, did you notice that was a problem? Then I would put it just squarely in the realm of temptation. And then beyond that, you have just dealing with the brokenness of the world. Like, bad things happen, and they might be a lesson for somebody, or they might be a temptation for somebody, but you just kind of sit back and say, wow, that's terrible. And an example, I mean, it's a strong example. It's maybe a loaded example, but consider the conflicts overseas. Most, if not all, of our listeners are here in America. The conflict, whether that's in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine, or in the Middle East between however many different parties are involved with the conflict at the time of listening.
Everybody and their neighbor's cousin. Yeah.
For us, we're not really being tested. And there's not really a lot of temptation involved. Now, you could say there's some testing, or there's some temptation with regard to how do we respond, like, how do we think and talk about stuff like this. But by and large, like, it's just something we're looking at. We're saying it is terrible that there's all this loss of life and all this destruction. Like, this is the brokenness of creation on display. Okay, so that's kind of the broadest category. And I have, when we record these podcasts, and if you're listening, you're not missing too much. I have these little Post-it notes that I keep next to my my writing hand, so I can just jot down thoughts, so I don't forget them when the time comes. And I drew myself a little diagram, and I'm sure you've seen diagrams like it before. They're concentric circles, where testing is in the middle, And then temptation is wider because not all temptations are tests, but initially I was like, but tests are can be temptations. And then the broadest version is there is some brokenness of the world that isn't a temptation, but some of it is. So you have the biggest circles of brokenness of the world. But then it occurred to me, I do think that testing does not have to be temptation. So I should have drawn a Venn diagram instead.
It's gonna be a
I
very
will contend-
complicated diagram.
I think it would just be it would be the classic Venn diagram of temptation and testing, where some temptation is testing and some testing is temptation, but there's also temptation that's not testing and testing that's not temptation. I would put both still in the larger circle of the brokenness of the world, because if the world wasn't broken, we wouldn't need to be tested. We wouldn't need to grow, and we wouldn't be tempted to go against the will of God. So that's kind of how I parse them out and how I relate them to each other on a more maybe more from the definition standpoint rather from the experiential standpoint that Ben was giving us. But
so maybe like brief summary here. Testing is something you're experiencing with the possibility of an up arrow result, like your faith is increasing. Temptation is the thing you're experiencing with the possibility of a down arrow result. Your faith weakens or disappears. And the brokenness of this world is something that you just experience and could be either of those two things in addition.
yeah, I don't think that's a bad summary. I do want to pause here in the middle of this episode. This feels like we have our stuff together more than maybe ever before, and it feels weird. We need more shenanigans. I'm gonna go get a costume.
Okay.
I'm kidding. I'm not gonna get a costume. Anyway, so I do. Hold on. I think it's worth just tossing in here at the end of this conversation before we move to our next section. I'm okay if we also introduce kind of just a wild card category of things that may be bad, maybe good. We don't really know what's going on with them until much later, or maybe even until we get to ask God face to face. So like, and maybe a good way to describe this category would be just the weird stuff that you're like, I don't know if I was supposed to learn a lesson from this. I don't know if this was a temptation. I don't even know if this is a bad thing, but I'm not sure. It just feels weird. We can say there's a wild card category for such things. Like if you have just an average interaction with Ben, like that would go in that category. We're like, I don't know what's going on here. Anyway,
that's fair. I think anyone that listens to this that comes to my Tuesday afternoon Bible study will recognize that is a fair and accurate statement. Josh and I were talking before we started the episode today about like what we've done in Bible study and just confirming that we weren't overlapping with something that we talked about already. And I mentioned that, you know, it's taken us about a year to get through 1st and 2nd Kings, which I think it's a reasonable pace.
It's not bad.
That's 40. I want to say 47 chapters.
22 plus 25. So yeah, 47 chapters. So you're going about a week a chapter. That's not bad. Especially if you took breaks. Like, yeah.
I mean, there were a couple weeks off in there. There were a couple of weeks where we just never got to the topic at hand.
In those 1st or 2nd Kings studies usually.
Oh yeah. My favorite Bible study sessions are the ones where you don't spend much, if any, time on the topic that you were supposed to start on. So anyway, where was I going with this?
I don't know where you were going with that.
This
I
makes
made a
great.
derogatory comment about you and you were responding
That's
to
fair.
that. But
Oh,
we're
okay.
ready to segue into what temptation might, or what testing can look like for us today.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
and not an exhaustive list, obviously, but Ben, what are some, from your perspective at least, common temptations that are maybe better perceived as tests?
I actually, if you don't mind, can I reroute us?
I
I'd rather
guess.
start with temptations. So, like, and categorically, my brain just loves to do this. If you've sat through a Bible study with me, I've probably done something like this before. Um, when we're thinking about sin and the ways in which we might either be encouraged against it or toward it, the best place for us to go as we're thinking about that is just like the categories of the Ten Commandments. So that's where my brain is starting. And you can just run through the list, right? You shall have no other gods. Fear, love, and trust in God above all things, Luther says, right? So temptations are those things that cause you to fear, love, trust in something else above God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Prioritize your rest and worship, not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. If you're finding ways that you're being distracted from that, those are temptations. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. If you're finding ways that you're being encouraged to do that, swear, lie, use satanic arts per the um, explanation, right? Don't do that. Those are temptations. And you can just kind of go on down the list through honoring your father and mother, murder, adultery, theft, bearing false witness, coveting of living things and non-living things. Like, just run down that checklist. If there's something distracting you from upholding one of those commands, it is a temptation. Within that, you start to find some opportunity for testing. Now, as Josh mentioned, not all testing is temptation. But oftentimes, for our personal faith growth, I think there's some level of temptation within a test, right? So even if the testing is around the example that I gave earlier of Ghost runs away, right? That's not necessarily okay. Maybe Zeke left the door open or something and the dog got out. There'd be an issue there.
It's happened before.
I'm not surprised. I feel like every parent of a small child with a run happy dog has some example of that.
If you ever want to know, can Pastor Josh run at full speed for about 1.5 miles chasing a husky? The answer is yes. Is he going to say some rude things on the way walking home? Also, yes. For what it's worth, both of my dogs have GPS collars. So because huskies are fast, so even if they get out, like I can go find my dog. Anyway. Well,
Yeah.
The testing temptation thing, I'm thinking like if someone asks you a question where your understanding of the faith is challenged and you're struggling with that and like it reveals that you have some space to grow in your understanding, I wouldn't call that a temptation, but a test for sure.
Yeah.
Because it's revealing an opportunity. So that's kind of why I adjusted my.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And like in the example that I gave, is your faith being tested because your parenting like skills and patience are being tested in that moment? Yeah. And are there temptations associated with that? Yeah, you might want to throw Zeke out a window. I
did when I got home. I told Zeke, I said, "Buddy, you are kind of lucky that I had time to cool off as I was walking back home."
Yeah, and anyone who knows Josh knows that he loves the heck out of Zeke and would never lay a finger on him in anger. Like I'm sure that there was a temptation there to just really give it to him. But
Yeah. Send him
God
to
tested
his room
you.
for a whole bunch of time. Anyway.
God tested you. He strengthened you, or he's in the process of strengthening you, right? And we move on, right? And so like it, the lines on this Venn diagram, I think, are blurry, right? Because even when it's testing that doesn't necessarily include blatant temptation, I think there are going to be small temptations along the way
At
that
any
also
given
help
point
define
in
the
your
testing.
life, there is a temptation to handle things in ways you shouldn't. Like that is persistent.
Yeah.
And at the same time, any temptation can become a growth opportunity. Some are harder than others to take advantage of.
Yeah. I think that's also, I think that's worth pointing out that like you might face some temptation that in the moment it's definitely just a temptation. But like, I don't know, 2-3 years later, somebody you're sitting down with and you're like telling them this story and they just drop some wisdom nugget on you that turns that pure temptation into, huh, there was a test here. I passed at the time, I didn't know it. And now I'm growing 3 years later. That's cool. This is where we remember God's timeline is much bigger than ours. And like,
His plans are much more intricate.
yes, they have the time to play out in ways that we don't like because that's not our timeline. That takes too long. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving forward, now that Ben has kind of covered that this can look very broad, and I do want to get to this, where some places where testing happens most frequently. And I would point to just small daily interactions. I think is the kind of the big bin I want to put this in, because I mean, are there these big watershed moments where there is a major temptation, there's a major opportunity for growth, and it's like a milestone moment that you'll be telling the story for the rest of your life? Yeah, there are moments like that, but I think more often growth is in the habitual things. So testing and temptation are in our habits and in our daily interactions. Like a very easy one to look at is social media. The content that you choose to view, the content you choose to put out, if you are inclined to posting or sharing posts, like that's a place where it could be a very regular opportunity for growth and to observe weaknesses and pitfall. You're like, oh, that made me unreasonably angry. I might need to work on that. Or something. Like, it can be that. It can also just be a temptation that should be avoided. I would say the same, not just to beat up on social media as much as I love to do that, um, but even just in like conversations you have when you're talking with other people, and there's an opportunity for gossip or to speak ill of your neighbor. That conversation, or even to build up the people you're talking with, it can be an opportunity for growth. It can be an opportunity where you say, hey, like, I'm not handling this great, or I'm not treating this person with the kind of grace and love that I should. Or it can just be a temptation. But those kinds of things, and when you look at testing as there is an opportunity for growth, the best growth is not, it doesn't necessarily come in spurts. It is something you grow a little bit every day, and then you look back a couple years later and you see how far you've come. So, although that might be at least some of my bias as a weightlifter, where if you like day to day, you're like, I'm not that much stronger, but then you look back 5 years and you're like, I used to be pathetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
Anything
think,
you want to add to that, Ben?
yeah, I think another great avenue for testing, outside of just like the little interactions is relationships. I think for a lot of us, we get really comfortable in long-term relationships, right? Whether it be a marriage, a parent with a child, a neighbor to a neighbor. I mean, heck, I think about some of our members here who've been here since the beginning. So they've known each other for like 50 plus years. And in some cases, I think they've done a decent job of continuing to grow in those relationships. And in some cases, I think like, hey, they hit a plateau like 20 years ago and they've just been coasting on that ever since. But those relationships where you know somebody in that kind of depth, and your interactions together, right? You got the little things, you got the big things. You can kind of see both sides of the picture when you've had that kind of a relationship. Those are great avenues for testing to turn into real growth, because you've got someone walking you through these kinds of things with wisdom, or you're walking somebody else through these things with the wisdom that God has given you. And you can, in a lot of cases, just you grow together, right? It's not just a one or the other kind of thing. So I think relationship is a big one. And I think there's something to, like you said too, like habitual things, and especially habitual things that lead to accountability for yourself. So like, Josh, you do this better than I do. Before what, like 2 weeks ago, you were kind of the one keeping yourself accountable for getting to the gym and working out and that kind of thing, right? For reference, we started a group chat to roast each other, and a couple of other people, if we fail to work out on a given day.
The name of the group chat is Get Swole or Get Emotional Damage.
It's pretty excellent. But like, for some people, there is that ability to form habits that give you a self accountability. And for some people, like, you can do some sort of like meditative practices, or there's some stuff in the hymnal, like you can pray through the litany or pray through confession, and like hold yourself to account for some of the testing and temptation that you faced, with possibility for growth. I do think that can happen on your own, and like spending time in the Word. Can God walk you through some growth through testing in the Word? Heck yeah, do it.
Well, and I think what you've stumbled into here is what we're going to kind of close on, and that's how do we, generally speaking, handle testing? And Ben kind of first maybe start with an attitude of you're looking for opportunities to grow. Like you should be constantly looking for opportunities to grow as a disciple. Like our whole lives ought to be spent in mastery of discipleship, and that is a like you are never done with that. But there's reflection is a really big part of it. Like what distinguishes testing from temptation, a lot of it is the self-reflection to see weaknesses or to see where there are opportunities for growth, and that is all within the context of the Word of God. So it's not just, how do you feel? It's like when I compare my life and the things I've done and the way I handle things to the Word of God, where am I found wanting? And then part of that is also inviting other people into that conversation that can norm you, that can say like, hey, you're overreacting about this, or who can challenge you and say like, hey, you should take this more seriously. Like, and can have that voice. And like, if you really want to know how to take testing and growth, we did a whole season that we just finished a few weeks ago on discipleship, and I would encourage you to peruse that, because a lot of the resources that are just point blank applied to discipleship would also be employed in how we handle testing. Yeah. So
there's maybe just to kind of give it hopefully tie a little bow on this. There's a great phrase that comes from the Reformed tradition, semper reformata, always reforming. The idea being, as broken, sinful people, or in the case of the original use of the phrase, broken, sinful institutions, even like as the church, these are human institutions run by sinful people. They need to be corrected and fixed, right? So what are we always correcting towards? What are we always building towards? What are we always being tested and shaped and formed towards? Well, it's who Christ is calling us to be through his scriptures and through his good and gracious will for creation, the law, right? And done so with his grace and mercy poured out for us in Christ. So, like, that is our target lane. We want to have a worldview and a personal, like, self view that is always pointing us back towards Christ. And that, I think, will give us a strong awareness towards the testing, the temptation, the crud that we deal with in the world because it is sinful and broken.
Yeah. With that little bow on how we handle testing, as we're finishing up our introduction to season 10, to the book of Job. For anyone who's new, we end our episodes by tossing in some empty netters. If you're not familiar with hockey, at the end of a lot of games, if it's at all close and one of the teams is losing, they will pull their goalie, which is something you can do. You put the goalie goes on the bench and you get an extra skater out. Empty net goals are obviously what the winning team is then trying to put in and assure their victory. They're easy to make because the goal is empty. The net is empty. There's no goalie blocking it. You just have to get it past the defenders. So at the end of our episodes, as the clock is winding down, we tap in some empty netters. Hopefully, if you're going to take 1 point away from the episode for each of us, that's what these are for. So with that, Ben, you got an empty netter you want to tap in here?
Man, before we get to that, you made my brain think. So far, all we've given people is like raw vegetables, lots of fiber. These are difficult things to digest. Here is your bite of ice cream. Your hit of sugar, easily digestible. Here we go.
You only get one bite, though.
You only get one bite. Everything in moderation, right? Empty netter. Just be aware of what God's doing in your life. That sounds really easy. It's a much more complicated process than one line can give it. But if you don't understand what's going on around you, stop, think, ask questions of yourself and the people around you, and take time to see what God might be doing in your life.
And my empty netter that I'll close us off with is just keep your eyes up for growth opportunities, especially when you're going through the hard parts of life. Try to view it as a chance for growth rather than just something you have to suffer through. So on that positive, on that incredibly pleasant and joyful note, brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you for listening in to this episode of Cross-Checking, a ministry of Hope and Good Shepherd Lutheran Churches, where we strive to deepen your understanding of the faith and help apply it to daily life. If this podcast is helpful to you, rate the podcast, subscribe to us on your favorite platform, and share it with others who might also gain something from it.